Perhaps best known for their output from the mid-90s, legendary hip-hop group A Tribe Called Quest's best material actually came out in 2016. Their last album, We Got It From Here, Thank You For Your Service, was the comeback that MC Malik Taylor or Phife Dawg always wanted, and a reason for fellow MC and producer Kamal Fareed, or Q-Tip, to pull the group back together after continually telling Phife that the feeling just wasn't the same. It was an excuse for Jarobi White, professional chef and founding member of the group, to return to music, and a reason for DJ Ali Shaheed Muhammad to return to the studio with his childhood friends. Above all else, it was reason for the real tribe to celebrate, the people. Tip has confirmed this on a number of occasions, the idea that A Tribe Called Quest wasn't the 4 core members of the group, or even their frequent collaborators. Instead, everyone was part of the tribe, part of the movement that they represent. That's because the group was selfless in everything they did. They didn't rap about themselves as much as their contemporaries. Their music was intended to feel democratized, as if it wasn't Q-Tip or Phife making music, so much as they were channeling the people's energy and converting it into music. Of all of their albums, their first arguably exemplifies this the most, at least with its lyrical content. People's Instinctive Travels and the Paths of Rhythm is an album that, as Ali put it, celebrated you, whoever you are, instead of putting up a front of toughness and perceived masculinity. It almost entirely lacks the bravado and swagger of other popular hip-hop of the time, in favor of something more modest, groovy, and fun. They sounded different from their contemporaries, they acted differently from their contemporaries, and in their early music videos, they even dressed differently. But something was still missing, and a year and a half later, the people learned that that something was Phife Dawg.
Check this out.
Yo, microphone check 1, 2, what is this?
After taking a back seat to Tip on the debut, Malik was encouraged to step up his MC game on the Low End Theory, and it completed the entire picture. Phife wasn't as brash as Run DMC, but he provided a nice contrast to Tip's smoother flows and rounded out the whole group. More than anything else, the group sounded like they were having a blast in the studio recording both this album and its follow-up. A lot of people say A Tribe Called Quest ended in 1993, after their release of their third album, Midnight Marauders, but they actually released 2 albums after that. The 4th album, Beats, Rhymes, and Life, is a personal favorite of mine, but was criticized by fans for just not feeling quite right. The production was darker, the tone was almost bitter, and above all else, it signaled a deterioration of the communal energy and brotherly spirit that seemed to pulse throughout the group in their early releases. Phife had moved away from Linden Boulevard down to Atlanta, Georgia. Q-Tip had converted to Islam, and his cousin Consequence, who would go on to work closely with Kanye West, was enlisted to guest on a whopping 7 tracks on the album. Following that was the Love Movement, which, in hindsight, is anything but. It comes off as boring, soulless, and lacking any sort of real emotional weight, lyrical punch, or interesting sonic direction. So with the release of that project, in 1995, the group disbanded and went their separate ways. On occasion, the group would reunite for performances, either for their fans or to help raise money for Phife's increasingly costly diabetes treatment. But every time they did, the feeling of camaraderie that defined the group's early catalog would never quite be there. Until one fateful night on primetime television, when it just suddenly was. According to Tip, the group's performance on The Tonight Show, their first televised performance in 18 years, was filled with an energy they hadn't felt in some time. The inspiration came the same night, from the tragic Paris suicide bombing attacks that killed over 100 people. With the world in an increasingly volatile, polarized, and openly bigoted state, the group set out to reunify the tribe. Not just A Tribe Called Quest, but the real tribe. Their fans, people of color, their allies, and their movement. So they set aside their differences, went to the studio, and got to it. They put pen to paper, they wrote from the heart, and got to work. Fellow tribesmen Busta Rhymes and Consequence returned, and even Jarobi, who hadn't appeared in a song since the debut album, came back to the microphone to speak his truth. Months down the road, Q-Tip announced the release of what would be, obviously, the final A Tribe Called Quest album, thereby concluding their Paths of Rhythm. After 18 long years, it's fitting that the core of this album wasn't about their old school New York antics, but instead their age and the passing of time. As the white-led world moves forward through time, everyone else is continually left behind. As the clock ticks ahead, people grow old and have to place trust in younger generations to continue their advocacy for change. And as the music and art people use to embolden that fight changes, their influences risk being forgotten. The album's opening 2 tracks are a perfect example of the former, passionately standing against the overt racism of the modern era in a way that is necessarily more blatant than any prior Tribe release. The hook of the lead single, We the People, deconstructs the idea of the other and how bigoted policy stems from the idea of difference being inherently bad. The opener leans into the Afrofuturist aesthetic, hypothesizing on what life as a black person would be like if massive steps in human achievement, such as the titular space program, were truly inclusive of non-white people. After painting in metaphor throughout the track, Q-Tip pulls away the curtain at the end of the second verse, just to make sure people understand what's really being addressed. Shortly after, the record meanders more towards discussions around their age, their legacy, and how it's ultimately up to future generations to continue the hard work to end the inequities that opened the album. This generation argues against the unjust hatred of younger modern mumble rappers, and claims that the same kind of talent that existed back in the low-end theory era exists today in the form of new faces like Kendrick Lamar and Earl Sweatshirt. And Kids addresses the anxieties and fears of that next generation directly, reminding them that their parents likely felt the same way.
They've been through it too though, they were kids like you though.
It was in the spirit of the album's themes that Phife suggested its title, We Got It From Here, Thank You For Your Service, a title that the rest of the group didn't necessarily even fully understand the meaning of. In hindsight, it fits the themes of the album perfectly, but for reasons that weren't apparent to the group at the time, as the next spring, Time and Sugar caught up to Malik Phife Dawg Taylor, who passed away from diabetes on March 22, 2016. Loss is a complicated feeling to accurately describe. Many have written whole books about it, but it's something that many of us have become intimately familiar with years after the release of this album, over the course of the historic year that was 2020. The one recurring thing about loss is that it comes to at least partially define what comes next in one's life purely because of how dominating and overbearing it can be. As such, the next A Tribe Called Quest album would have to, at least in part, become an album about loss, which managed to play well with the themes the album was already addressing. The Thank You For Your Service part of the title could refer to this being Tribe's final album and final artistic statement as a group, but it could also retroactively refer specifically to Phife, a hip-hop servant who was lost too soon. The We Got It From Here part also gained a double meaning with Phife's passing, as not only could it refer to younger generations taking on the work of making meaningful change happen, but it could also apply to the arduous burden placed on the rest of the group, and Q-Tip specifically, to literally take it from there and bring the album to the finish line as Phife would have wanted. In the album's announcement, it's clear that there was a feeling of moral obligation on Tip's end, as he writes that it was something the rest of the group didn't just choose to finish, but had to finish. Black Spasmodic illustrates that duality quite effectively, and if anything, is a more interesting song because of it. The first verse, recorded by Phife before his death, is on its own one of the weaker verses on the record, simply bragging about his pen game and expressing excitement about the group finally getting back together. But Q-Tip's verse, written after his death, reframes the first verse through the context of Tip hearing Phife's voice in his head. Sonically, it's represented by a sort of haze placed over Phife's voice that recurs throughout the album, as if he literally descended from the great beyond to rap for us. But lyrically, it's spelled out verbatim at the start of the verse. Then, Tip begins to quote the verse he hears in his head, picking up where the first verse left off and morphing it into what Phife would say to him in that moment. The next track, Killing Season, features no core Tribe members on the mic outside of a single Jarobi verse, and largely stars the returning Consequence and his mentor Kanye West as they address the losses and inequities of black folks in America, likening it to soldiers being sent out to fight in a war. The song clearly began life as a more political track akin to the 3 openers, but feels different being placed directly after Phife's pseudo-farewell track in Black Spasmodic. It equally feels like a tribute to Phife's service. This is followed by Lost Somebody, which over the years has become more and more of a favorite of mine and may be the best song on the album. The sonic direction of the entire album feels like it was building up to this moment. Recurring motifs, little snippets of samples, play at the idea of a larger connective tissue holding the whole project together, and there's a sense of intentionality to the production that just isn't seen very often to this pedigree. One gets the impression that every last note of every instrumental snippet was meticulously tweaked until it sounded just right. That's why at first it seems bizarre that Lost Somebody opens with a bass guitar outright failing to get into rhythm, sort of stumbling at the beginning, and taking a full 18 seconds to really get going. and when it does, it clicks into place with a sort of limp, as if the song just barely fell into place. But in its own way, it mirrors the surrealism of grief itself, as if the thump of the drum mirrors the awkward walk up to the podium for your brother's funeral, not wanting to be there, but still having to step, right after left after right. The chorus, lightly interpolating lyrics from the can sample being flipped for the beat, is lightly mumbled in the background, a dry run of sorts to make sure that whatever is said will be articulated just right, because this is the only chance for it to be right. Q-Tip then opens with his verse, which feels like the eulogy that one delivers when they're trying their very best not to break down in front of their friends and family, written verbatim on a sheet of paper and read out to the crowd, telling the story of the man himself, his parents, his upbringing, and his impact, delicately topped with a personal anecdote that touches on their adversarial yet brotherly relationship. Jarobi's verse then follows, which feels like the exact opposite, the kind of eulogy someone gives when they're still processing the death itself, haphazardly delivering a series of completely unrelated but sentimental anecdotes. It sounds intentionally overwritten and rife with emotional potency. Perhaps that's not the best way to describe what is unilaterally one of Jarobi White's best verses, but maybe the fact that it evokes such a vivid image is a testament to its quality. Jarobi himself cited this as the hardest verse he ever had to write. Following the two eulogies comes the procession, which is played out by the chorus that was hinted at earlier. Many songs would choose to go another verse or simply end after 2 or 3 repeats of the chorus, but Q-Tip and company choose to hang on to these words a bit longer, repeating them several times over and letting them really sink in before suddenly the song cuts out, right in the middle of the word crying. It doesn't go to another verse, it doesn't go back to the chorus, it doesn't go to the next track, it just sits in silence. Sound can be manipulated in a seemingly infinite number of ways, and that manipulation is what makes music. It can make us smile, laugh, dance, jump, and even cry. And we hear it constantly, not just in the music we consciously choose to listen to, but in our day-to-day experiences as well. From the radio in the grocery store, to the ringers of our phones, to the drones of the appliances in our homes operating as they should. Suffice to say, with all of the noise of the world, it's often easy to forget the emotional power that silence has. And on Lost Somebody, those 15 seconds are excruciating. It's hard to get through. It almost hurts. It feels like an hour of nothing. It sounds lonely. It sounds cold. It sounds sad, even frightening. Make no mistake, the soundscape this album paints is immaculate, but this span of 15 seconds is the most powerful moment of the entire project. Suddenly, a guitar cuts through the silence like a knife, flashing like a snap back into reality. The guitarist, the legendary Jack White, plays out the track with a simple guitar solo. While a bit off kilter, it's a nice way of transitioning back to the music from such a powerful moment. It works. The rest of the album grapples with the death of Fife in both direct and indirect ways while continuing to orbit around its main themes. Ego, the second to last track, plays like an old school Low End Theory style Tribe classic, but with a darker melodic undertone that creeps back into the sound every now and again, hinting at the idea of something being off about the whole thing. Moving Backwards follows up on some of the ideas presented in Kids, the fear of not knowing where to go and what to do, something that many people after experiencing grief also face. Its title also cleverly plays into the following track, which literally moves backwards to a time when Fife was still alive, in his only song without any fellow tribesmen. Conrad Tokyo is a fierce critique of modern-day American politics condensed into 2 short and powerful verses, the latter being one of Kendrick Lamar's best ever guest appearances. But instead of leaving the song at that, it instead revisits Fife's opening verse and contorts its first line into the hook. It's not even a particularly brilliant line, but it's Fife's line, and that's all that seems to matter. After slowly fading out, the song roars back to life one last time, calling back to the classic choruses of Can I Kick It and Scenario. It feels like a meditative dance lost in a moment of nostalgia and bliss, until the guitar comes back, again snapping listeners back into reality. Another reminder that, yup, he's still gone. It mirrors real grief so well in the sense that you sometimes legitimately forget that they've passed away. The last track, The Donald, is a final tribute to Fife, doing so with a lesser-known nickname he adorns in his final verse, Don Juice. It uses a similar strategy to earlier tracks, hanging on to bits of both Busta Rhymes' opening verse and Fife's verse to craft a chorus to ride out the rest of the album, fittingly ending on
Fife Dog.
a worse album. Maybe not a worse album, but at the very least a different album would have put Fife's death front and center and framed the entire album around him. It would open with an overt message explaining what the album's about, and every song would loop back to the central idea of celebrating Fife's legacy. We'd be told how great of a rapper Fife was, and how influential to the world of hip-hop he was throughout the entire track list. Instead of that, we got a project that meanders a lot more, akin to the best of the catalog that preceded it. After all, A Tribe Called Quest's place as a group isn't to tell us how to feel or what to say. Their place is to stand in solidarity with everyone else. We all grieve differently. We all experience the world differently. But Tribe set the tone for the moment. The group's final gift delivered a fitting parting message and passed the torch on to future generations, while also doing what may be the most important thing, sounding like, while Fife was there both in person and in spirit, they were having fun making music. The group may have ended, but their music lives on. Fife Dog may be gone, but he lives on through that music. We thank A Tribe Called Quest for their service, but we've got it from here. The one thing that will never end is our Tribe Called Quest, the real tribe. So long as we stick together, as a family, as a movement, and as a society, no amount of loss and grief will stop us from saying,
Thank you so much for watching this video. This one took a long time to make. You might have seen snow on the ground throughout the video. Some segments of this video were filmed last winter, like as early as February, January. And if it wasn't obvious, it's due to the subject matter. This is a heavier video for me. And it hits on, stuff that's been going on, not just for me, but for a lot of people, not just, in my area or in my country, but all over the world. And I want to say now explicitly what I kind of suggested implicitly in the video, which is that, I'm certainly not alone in my feeling of loss and grief, and I'm far, far from the worst case of this. There are people who have lost their entire families as a result of what's been going on over the past 2 years, or something completely unrelated to what's happened over the past 2 years. And this album and how they dealt with their grief is just a means for me to deal with my own, and I hope that maybe it helped you deal with your own as well. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there is a posthumous Fife album that's supposed to come out. They're taking their time with it, which I think is an indicator that they're, treating this with the, seriousness and respect that it deserves. I fully expected it to be out by the time this video finished up, given how long it's taken me to make it, but I understand why it might be taking them a long time to make it as well. So thank you all so much for watching. Normally I would spend this time plugging other videos or doing other things, but that's just not really appropriate for this one. So there will be some links. Watch if you like, stick around for whatever comes next, and that's about it. Have a good one.
The most annoying seatbelt of all time.